quite quickly today. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we'll be focusing on marketing in general, on the first part, but the main focus today will obviously be on marketing campaigns. And there's a big difference here. You hear a lot of words getting thrown around, whether it's marketing, advertising, marketing campaigns, and then you hear social media marketing and so on. It's a very, very big area, and it's very important to also distinguish between all the different aspects of marketing. So when we say marketing in general and or marketing and advertising in general, which is what you see anywhere you go, right? So when you go out and you see a billboard or you see anything related to a company who's promoting their products or their services, this is generally marketing. But what then defines a marketing campaign? I want to make also the distinction here today. So let's take a very simple example, right? So if I'm going out and I pass by a billboard from, let's say, Batelco, right? And that billboard is just simply promoting Batelco as a telecom, whether it's one of their services or their offers or stuff like that. So that in general is simply marketing or advertising. This is your normal, but it's not necessarily a campaign. What defines usually a campaign is this, right? So you would have a connected series of operations designed to bring about a particular result. Now, what does that mean? I read it off the screen, but let's take, for example, when fiber came out here in Bahrain, right? So you had an introduction of a new product from the telecom, and then they would market that product to obviously generate sales, get more subscribers, or so on and so forth, or simply just promote the product in general. And that is done through concerted effort, of course, across several platforms. It could be billboards on the streets, it could be in your social media, it could be on Google, it could be through other venues, whether it's print media or digital or in other websites. So all of them will focus on a particular result, and that result would be either the promotion of their new fiber service, or let's say to generate more subscribers on that service, and so on and so forth. So just keep in mind, a marketing campaign is always a very linked operation that basically takes care of a particular result or desired result. Okay, so whenever you define that in terms of time, in terms of space, in terms of goals and objectives, then you can define this as a marketing campaign. If you're simply just promoting your company, if you're simply just building awareness or keeping your brand on people's mind, that's simply marketing. So if I put a Eid Mubarak post, let's say, on my social media, or I participate in any other, let's say, general holiday via post or email or so on, that's just me, maintaining my presence. And that's important in itself. But building a campaign is something very different. So what we'll do today, and the objective of today's session would be to go through all the questions that you should ask yourself and answer in order to build a marketing campaign and run it end to end, right? So the objective today would be obviously to answer this question generally. So how do we successfully create a marketing campaign? Now, the first question, of course, and as I said, it's not a marketing campaign if you don't have a goal or purpose behind it. So the first question, obviously, you have to ask is, what is the goal of your campaign? And here I've just listed a few simple goals or generic ones, if you will. It could be to promote a new product or service. So as I said, when let's say a telecom company is introducing a new product or a new service or a new offer, it could be to increase brand awareness. So let's say you're either entering a new market or you're trying to build more brand awareness in your own market. That could be another goal, getting customer feedback, boosting engagement in general, or obviously the more important one here is generating revenue, right? So if you are marketing to generate a specific amount of revenue. Now, these all seem to be very generic, but how we define them and how you should formulate those goals is obviously by making them smart goals. Now, smart goals, of course, everyone knows what smart goals are. They're very specific, they're measurable, they're, all these things have to be defined. So if I want to, let's say, promote a new product or service, so that is the goal of my campaign, I should be very specific about it. So what is the product I am promoting? I have to put a metric on it, right? So I want to generate, for example, 500 new subscriptions to my new product within, let's say, 1 quarter or 3 months, right? So that's very specific. I can measure it at the end of those 3 months, and I put a time frame on it, right? So all your goals should be defined in this way, right? You have those goals, you have the goal defined, you know why you're running this campaign, then you move on, obviously, to the next step. Now, how will you measure it? You built a SMART goal with which in essence is very measurable, right? So how will you measure it? And the metrics here, when it comes to measurement, can be in the dozens. You can measure one thing or you can measure 100. It doesn't really matter as long as you're very specific and they define consequently how you build that campaign. So let's say, for example, you're building a new, you're promoting a new product. So you could measure it in terms of how many pre-orders or sales of that product have I achieved, right? Or if you're building brand awareness, then how many, let's say, social mentions, or how many followers, or how many engagements in general, and so on and so forth. So these could be the metrics you try to measure when you're building brand awareness. If you're gathering customer feedback, right? So if, let's say, I'm putting out a survey, or I'm just posting questions on social media, or I'm sending out emails, I could measure that based on, let's say, qualified responses in this case. And then obviously boosting user engagement, generating revenue, obviously generating revenue, you can measure it in sales, but you have to define. So after you define your goal, you have to define how will you measure your goals, or how will you measure the success toward that goal. And this is by basically going through all these things. Now, I would say the most important part, and if you don't define this, then obviously your whole campaign could fall apart, is basically who you're targeting. A lot of people make a very huge mistake in that when they're trying to target people or promote their product, let's say, what they do is they just put the word out there. Now, putting it out there or casting your net as widely as possible could be good if your target is the mass market, but no one really targets the mass market in essence, right? So you could be saying, well, I'm targeting everyone, but technically speaking, you're always, as a company, maybe, I would say, from, let's say, 18-year-olds all the way to 70, 80-year-olds. It could be that your company is doing that, but your campaign, in essence, should not be, right? If you're basically targeting everyone from professionals to all ages and groups, it's basically casting your net quite wide and makes it a lot more difficult, and you'll obviously spend a lot more money on. But what I mean by here building your audience is usually defining your buyer persona, we call it. So in terms of marketing campaigns, you define your buyer persona. Let's bring another example to fold, right? So Springring, which is my startup, now we're launching a marketing campaign soon. Now, the first thing we did was, who do we want to target, right? So by defining it as being people in the education industry. Now, that's also a very wide net. Who am I targeting in the education industry? By identifying those people. So let's say, for example, I'm targeting decision makers or principals in schools and so on. Then I need to define maybe age group. What are their interests, right? So they would be, for example, more interested in educational material and so on and so forth. So defining their interest. Where are they? And this is very important, right? So if my teachers or principals are mainly on, let's say, Twitter, but then I go and market everything on Instagram, then obviously I'll be failing in my objectives. If, let's say, they're mainly on Facebook or they're participants on Facebook groups, then maybe I should target there. If my audience, and not speaking about my specific product, but in general, if my audience is mainly people who read newspapers, right? Or specific newspapers, like let's say financial newspapers and so on, or magazines, then maybe target those. Maybe they want to, or let's say their interest is in more high-end products, then maybe target those. And there's a lot of that to be defined. So just define your persona, who you're targeting, where are they online, and by the way, it differs from country to country. So in Bahrain, most people are on Instagram, but if you go just across the border to Saudi Arabia, they could be using different platforms. If you go to Oman, maybe they're mostly on also different platforms, and so on and so forth. So again, where they're hanging out, what kind of content are they consuming? Is it mainly videos? Is it print media? Is it influencers that they're maybe mostly interested in? Again, those things need to be defined. And then obviously, this is something that I mentioned at the end here, but what problem? So relate to your audience. If you're trying to solve a problem, then obviously mention that in your campaign. You're trying to solve this problem for them. Or if you're not trying to solve their problem, but then capture their interest. And that's also something you need to define. So after you've defined who you're targeting. We've already defined what our target is or goal from the campaign and how we will measure it. The next step is what content. Now, this will also be defined as part of your persona building that we did earlier. But then after that, you need to build a huge concept for the campaign. And this concept, what we always say is it has a life of its own, right? So you define what's it has pretty much a vision, mission, and visual identity, right, in itself. And that obviously is coming from your company or your own identity. You can't go completely off with it. So it stems from that, but then it has its own kind of it's like you're launching a mini kind of company that is very time bound, and you go through that in this way. So define what is it that you want to achieve, how you want to achieve it, through what media you want to achieve it, and then build that concept together in itself. Now, the last step, of course, is where do you distribute your content? Because you've created the content, whether it's a very nicely done video whether it's a series of pictures and so on, whether it's billboards. I think everyone has seen the new marketing campaign for Betelco, for example, with the cat. Um, I don't know why they went with that, but obviously it captures people's attention. To be honest, I still don't understand why the cat, but I'm not a Betelco client, so maybe I wouldn't understand it. But in any case, as you can see, it's very capturing. You can see that it has its own, let's say, concept in itself, and it promotes a certain product. Now, that cat, I'm pretty sure if you've been around in Bahrain, you see them on billboards, right? You've seen that in social media sites, whether it's on Instagram or Google or so on. So they've kind of put it out there and unified this campaign in terms of visual identity across the board. Now, they've decided to reach their audience through obviously a series of channels. Now, you have channels here, and we've kind of split them up into four. And it's important. Some people might go with all of these. Others, if you're limited on budget, of course, and time, you could go for less. But it's important to identify where your buyers are and reach them through their preferred channels. So you have obviously your paid channels, and by these I mean your Google AdWords and Google Ads, your social media, paid advertising, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. It could be retargeting. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you, when you go to a certain, let's say, car agency website, all of a sudden your social media is flooded with ads from other car agencies, because that's called retargeting, and that's also a paid way of marketing. Or you could go with influencers and so on. So that's one way. So that's the whole paid kind of way. And usually it's the most effective way in reaching your audience, not in achieving your goals. It could be that you're going the wrong way about it. But in terms of reach, usually it's the most effective way these days. Then you have your earned ones. So whether it's influencers that you have connections with, whether it's outreach through your extended networks. WhatsApp is a very prime example here. So just putting it out there, people who you build word of mouth trust with and so on, that they can then spread. So that's also part of sharing content that usually happens. If you've seen recently with BahrainOrder.com, I'm sure a lot of people here got the WhatsApp message that was forwarded hundreds of times so far in Bahrain in the past 3 days. So that's one way, obviously, of doing it. But then you have your owned ones. Sorry. So your owned ones is obviously, and this is something that a lot of people kind of miss and they ignore as part of their campaigns. But these are things that you own and you can use as an outreach tool as well. So whether you have your own website, whether you have your blog, your own social media profiles, and marketing through that, email campaigns and email marketing, believe it or not, is still a very, very effective way of marketing. So reaching your own users and audiences is also a good way. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of ways to reach your audience. Obviously, this is all dependent on how much money you have. That's number one. But number two is where, after you've defined your audience, knowing where they hang out, where they are, where they spend most of their time, this is where the money should go into. This is where your marketing should go into. So once you've decided, so I'm going to reach them this way. So again, we've defined the buyers, we've defined how we're going to reach them, and so on. Now, once you've reached those audiences, so you've launched your campaign and so on, Now, what do you want your audience to do when they actually reach your campaign, when they see your campaign ad, when you capture their attention, what do you want them to do? And this is a very important thing that, again, a lot of people ignore, that you have to make the user take action, right? So whether it's a call to action button, and CTA here, what we call CTA, is a very important thing. So you have to basically lead them to take action on your ad, right? So whether it's clicking on a button that takes them to your website, whether it's signing up for, let's say, a demo for your product, whether it's clicking buy now, and you see a lot of these, buy now, and then takes you straight to the cart or straight to the product page where you can actually guide them through buying your product. So that's one way. Directing them to what we call a landing page here. So when you build a marketing campaign and you have it defined and everything, you could create a landing page, which is basically one page that has your call to action, and whether that's signing up to something, or whether it's buying something, and so on. So, or just simply promoting a certain product that you've launched. So depending on your goals, of course. So that's a landing page that is created for that purpose. Or it could be the lead forms. So if I'm planning on, especially for, let's say, business to business, my main, let's say, objective, and the objective of my next campaign will be to generate as many leads as possible that we can then take and convert to sales. Now, if I want to generate those leads, I have to put a lead capturing mechanism in place. Now, Instagram, Facebook have their own embedded ones that you can use. So let's say if you see an ad, sometimes it says sign up or buy now or something. When you click on it, you get this form that has, please enter your email, phone number, name, and so on, and they can submit. This is a lead capturing form. And this is also very important, depending, of course, on your objectives and business. But that's another way of doing it. But in general, what you have to keep in mind is that part of your campaign should always lead to your intended audience to take action upon seeing your ads or seeing your marketing material. So that's a very important, especially when you're online. Now, throughout all this and having defined how you will measure the success, you need to define the exact metrics in this case, right? So the click-through rate, conversion rates, cost per conversion, these are all marketing jargons that you will hear. But again, I haven't listed a lot of these, but there are literally dozens of metrics that you can define. But again, these are all defined based on the initial step that we did, which is when we define what our objectives are and how we will measure them. Based on that, you can define these. So let's say, I'll take again my company as the example here. We can come and say, well, okay, we're launching this marketing campaign to generate leads. Our target is to generate, let's say, 1,000 leads in a quarter. Those 1,000 leads will be in the form of a lead capturing form, whether on our website or through the social media channels. Our objective, or our metric, our main metric here, is how many signups on that lead generation form. And I'm simplifying this, of course, a lot, but that is something. If you're paying for marketing, it's very important to look at the click-through rates, the conversion rates, which is basically if people clicked, did they sign up or not? And that's the conversion. If you don't have that, again, you might be spending a lot of money, a lot of people clicking, but very few people signing up, which means that there's a problem, which takes me to the next step. You've launched a campaign, you've monitored everything, you've gathered all the data, and it's fine. but how do you know whether or not your campaign worked? And this is the important thing, right? This is where the data comes in. Now, by the way, social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, all these guys have very, very good analytics. And Google Analytics, when plugged into your website or your apps, again, gives you a lot of analytics to work with. But having all that data is useless. You need to convert that data into information. So if anyone here is in statistics or so on, you obviously know what I'm talking about, which is basically having data is one thing, but then the information that comes out of it is the most important part, right? So what are some, and these are very few, but some of the answers that you can get out of this data is what could have been done differently. And believe me, and I've been through this, it's going to be a hit and miss in a lot of cases in the beginning. While you understand your audience better, you understand your market better, you understand what the likes and dislikes of your target audience. So what could have been done differently is a big part here. So you launched a campaign, you got the data, and whether it was good or not, it doesn't matter here, but what could have we done differently, right? How could we have saved money is also a big thing. Now, we launched a campaign a few months back, right? And we launched it on Instagram, Facebook, and Google. But then, having spent almost equal amounts on both, we realized that the conversion rates on Google were almost 10 or 20 times higher than on social media. Now, I'm not saying this is the case always. This was the case for us because of who we were targeting. But we noticed that Google was much more effective. So we could have saved a lot of money there on Facebook, put it into Google, maybe spent even less money, but gotten better results. So then the next campaign, we re-divert the money into other things. And that's where you define, what went wrong, what did people like, what did people not like? It could be the messaging or so on, and then redefining things based on that. The next question, of course, is what did we learn about our audience? Just like what we learned, that our audience is mainly looking for our product on search engines, not on social media, right? So that was one part. Gathering feedback and so on, that's also a big thing. But these are definitely not exhaustive questions. You should always ask yourself a lot of questions when it comes to the data you've collected. And today you can gather tons of data when it comes to marketing. So this was obviously the last step, which is reviewing your marketing campaign and then doing things better the next time. Because obviously you're not launching only one marketing campaign. You're always going through campaigns of different objectives. So for the next one and so on.